Several weeks ago, Mayor Item appeared in my office doorway and said, "Mr. Reynolds, I have an idea." And in the 3.5 years I've worked for the mayor, I've learned that those words mean two things. Number one, the event or program will be first class and no detail will be overlooked. Number two, my life is about to get a whole lot busier. And so began the preparation for today's program. In planning for this event, I figured I'd reach out to two of the most powerful women in the world, Mother Nature and Siri. Now, Mother Nature has done her part and provided us with this absolutely beautiful day, and I sincerely thank her for her cooperation. Now, Siri, however, was a little bit sassier. When I asked her, "Siri, what are some ideas for celebrating the 100th anniversary of the ratification of the 19th Amendment?" she responded with, "Oh, so now a woman's opinion is important. Where were you before 1920, guy? Go do the research and figure it out for yourself." So I did. And the information you'll hear about today is both fascinating and, more importantly, significant. The 19th Amendment guarantees American women the right to vote. And achieving this milestone required a lengthy and difficult struggle. Victory took decades to accomplish. Beginning in the mid-19th century, women's suffrage supporters lectured, wrote, marched, lobbied, and practiced civil disobedience, all to achieve what many Americans considered to be radical change. Although the amendment's fate at times seemed in doubt because of opposition throughout much of the South, on August 18, 1920, exactly 100 years ago today, the state of Tennessee, by one single vote, became the 36th state to ratify the amendment, thereby ensuring its adoption. Today, we remember and celebrate this momentous date in our country's history. As I look around at so many influential women here today, I am proud to call many of you leaders, colleagues, and friends. Thank you for all you do to help Lansing be an incredible place to live, to work, and to celebrate. So let's begin the program. Our first speaker this morning is a woman who has called Lansing her home for just over 40 years. A proud military veteran who served as a military intelligence analyst in the U.S. Army, she was hired as Lansing's first full-time female police officer and paramedic in 1979. This successful leader within our community has previously served as a village trustee for 10 years and as village clerk for 4 years before assuming the position she now holds, Lansing's first ever female mayor. Among her many accomplishments is the prestigious Athena Award in 2007, an award presented annually to an individual who is honored for professional excellence, community service, and for actively assisting women in their attainment of professional excellence and leadership skills. Additionally, she is a past president and vice president of the Lansing Historical Society, a former director of the Lansing Association of Community Events, and a two-time winner of the Lansing Volunteer of the Year Award. It is my honor to welcome the leader of the Village of Lansing, the Honorable Mayor Patty Item.
Thank you for those kind words, Mr. Reynolds. I appreciate you more than you'll ever know. It is our pleasure to have all of you here with us today, ladies. You all look so beautiful. It was 172 years ago, in July of 1848, that women in our country began to speak up about equality. On their list of goals were equal rights in the workplace, in their community, within their own families, and the right to vote. As the decades rolled by, women realized they needed voting rights for even more, such as the need to reform child labor laws and to promote public health and to advocate for the ability to own their own property. The 19th Amendment to the United States Constitution was ratified on this date 100 years ago. It was written in its entirety with just 2 sentences. It reads, "The rights of the citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. Congress shall have the power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation." Powerful words, ladies, just a few, but powerful. It gave women the right to vote and so much more. It gave our mothers, our grandmothers, our great-grandmothers hope for opportunities and visions to make our country better then and for generations to come. On this day, the centennial of the 19th Amendment, of course, we think about life a full 100 years ago. Here in Lansing, the amendment was ratified without any mention in village records. I suppose life went on in our little village as it always had, at least for a short time. The house where our second mayor, Alfred Van Steenberg, and his family lived stood on this very site where we are gathered today. The Steenbergs built the house in 1880 and lived here for several decades. So I'd love to think that Mrs. Van Steenberg lived to see the 19th Amendment come to life. Just 27 years before the ratification of the amendment in 1893, the male residents of Bernice, Oak Glen, and Lansing voted with a tally of 67 for and 10 against to incorporate the 3 small boroughs to become the Village of Lansing. No women voted in that election. The mayor of Lansing 100 years ago on this date was Arnold C. Varick. He was the 3rd mayor of the Village of Lansing. Those of you that are passionate about genealogy will like this little story. Mayor Varick has relatives still living in Lansing today. His second cousin, Robert Varick, many of you know him as Book, was a very successful businessman here in Lansing. He is now enjoying retirement, and we all see him often with his wife around our village. Marilyn Coy is one of the directors of the Lansing Historical Society and is here with us today. Her maiden name was Varick. She is also a second cousin to Mayor Varick. Marilyn, could you stand for us? Thanks for being here, girlfriend. By the way, ladies, second cousins share a great-grandparent. Mayor Varick also has third cousins in Lansing. In fact, Mr. Reynolds is married to one. In addition to Mayor Varick being in office 100 years ago, there was a male village clerk and 6 male village trustees. There were no female Village of Lansing employees in 1920. So here we are today, ladies, 100 years later, and Lansing has 162 full-time employees. 36 of them are females. Will all the female employees, department heads, and directors of the Village of Lansing here with us today please stand? I'm so proud of all of you. Many of you are mothers. Some are the heads of single-family homes. But to me, you are amazing ambassadors for our village. I appreciate all of you so much. Thank you, ladies. Think about the 19th Amendment as you go through today and the rest of the week, ladies. Pause each time you do something you may not be able to do if the 19th Amendment did not exist. Many of you would not hold the jobs or the positions that we do today. The 19th Amendment has enabled women to make great strides in fairer wages, public health, and opportunities for women to own their own businesses. Higher education would not have been available to us if the amendment had not passed. Ladies, I cannot mention higher education without telling you a quick personal story. When I graduated from high school in 1966, I asked my dad if I could go to the local community college to study so I could become a police officer. He patiently explained that I may be the oldest of his 6 children, but he had 4 boys right after me that he would have to put through college. I joined the United States Army the next week. That was one of the best decisions I've ever made for myself. 46 years later, after the 19th Amendment passed, the military certainly helped me be where I am today. I've always appreciated that. It is easy to assume the 19th Amendment was beneficial to women. Of course it was, and it still is. However, we could also ask, how did the 19th Amendment change things for women so they were empowered to change the country and our Lansing for the better? Millions of women in our country took advantage of their new privilege to vote in the November election 100 years ago in 1920. They were just 32% of those that cast ballots that year. 4 years ago, in the 2016 November presidential election, women cast over 63% of the vote. Today is a reminder for all of us to be thankful for the women in our country that fought for women's suffrage over 100 years ago. It opened many doors for the women of America and allowed them to achieve a greater role in our society, economically, socially, and politically. I'm very thankful that we are here to celebrate that today, ladies. Thank you.
Our next speaker epitomizes community involvement and service to her community. Elected to the office of Village Clerk in 2017, her resume combines work experience and community service that have thoroughly prepared her for the office she now holds. Prior to taking over as the Village Clerk, she served as the executive assistant to former Lansing Mayor Norm Abbott and has also served as the executive director of the Lansing Area Chamber of Commerce. She is currently serving a 6-year term as a trustee on the South Suburban College Board. She is the past president of the Lansing Business Women's Association and the past secretary of the Planning and Zoning Board of Appeals. During her time with the village, she has initiated and organized Lansing's Community Cleanup Day for the past 10 years. And since taking over as clerk, she created Lansing's first beautification committee, which is responsible for planting and maintaining flowers and landscape in her downtown business district and in areas such as the decorative Lansing History Plaza located directly behind all of you. On a personal note, I thank her for all the assistance she gave me when I started with the village back in 2017. Please welcome Lansing's Village Clerk, Vivian Payne.
When Mayor Item asked me to help organize this event, she gave me a brief history of the ratification of the 19th Amendment and women's suffrage. One thing she mentioned stuck with me, and I just couldn't take it off my mind. She told me that it took women over 70 years to finally get the right to vote. 70 years, 7-0. After hearing that, I needed to know more, so I did my own research, and some of the things I read were quite astonishing. As the mayor mentioned, women began to speak up about equality back in 1848. It wasn't until 1878, 30 years later, that the women's suffrage movement actually gained prominence. That is when the amendment was first drafted by Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton and was introduced in Congress. Back then, it was known as the Anthony Amendment. And that is where the amendment lay dead for almost 40 years. Some people didn't see the point of women voting because they said women didn't understand politics. Others said that if women got the right to vote, they would take over the government or just vote for whomever the men in their lives told them to vote for. So in January of 1917, 39 years after the amendment was introduced and after decades of the government's refusal to endorse their cause, 12 educated, well-bred women carrying banners decided to stand outside the White House gates day after day in silent protest. Their initial banner read, "Mr. President, how long must women wait for liberty?" For 5 months, despite public hostility and President Wilson's refusal to act, the women continued their silent protest. Then in June, following an outburst of public anger, police were ordered to arrest the protesters for a fabricated traffic obstruction offense. This did not stop these determined women. Despite continued arrests, convictions, and months in prison for false charges, more women joined the battle and protests continued. Imprisoned women were kept from having any contact with the outside world, and many spent months of isolation in vermin-infested cells. They were given rancid food containing worms, rat droppings, and dead flies. Privileges that regular inmates received were denied to the suffragist women. When reports of mistreatment began to leak from the prison, angry women from across the country descended on Washington to join the fight and continue the picketing, while many of the imprisoned women went on hunger strikes. In spite of this oppression, these women actually had several legal champions, attorneys who knew that the arrests were illegal and that demonstrating was certainly within the rights of any citizen. The attorneys obtained court orders to force their way into the prisons, and once inside, they were outraged by what they found. A hearing was finally held in November of that year, and the prison superintendent was ordered to bring all of the suffragists before a U.S. Court of Appeals. The attorneys demanded justice for the women that were wrongfully imprisoned and treated so inhumanely. And then on November 27th, 3 days after the hearing, with no explanation at all, the suffragist prisoners were abruptly released. And so 1 year after the protest began on January 10th, 1918, exactly 40 years to the day since it was introduced in Congress, the Anthony Amendment passed the House of Representatives. The ultimate victory came on this day, August 18th, back in 1920, when the Anthony Amendment was finally ratified as our Constitution's 19th Amendment, giving women the right to vote. Now that I know the actual history of our right to vote, it will certainly make going to the polls for future elections so much more meaningful for me, and I hope it will be for all of you as well. Let us always remember the strong women who fought so hard and endured so much in order for us to be standing here in celebration today.
We are incredibly honored to welcome our next guest to the podium. U.S. Congresswoman Robin Kelly has dedicated her career to public service as an advocate for Illinois families. Since being elected to serve the 2nd Congressional District in 2013, she has worked to expand economic opportunity, community wellness, and public safety across the state, while also championing numerous initiatives to generate job growth, reduce health disparities, and end gun violence. She is a member of the House Energy and Commerce Committee and serves on the Health, Energy, and Consumer Protection and Commerce subcommittees. Her energy and commerce work is focused on expanding access to health care, consumer protection for American families, and economic development. Committed to improving the health and wellness of vulnerable communities across the country, the Congresswoman serves as the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus Health Brain Trust and co-chairs the Congressional Caucus on Black Women and Girls. She also co-chairs the House Democratic Policy Group and House Tech Accountability Caucus. I do not know how you get all that on one business card, Congresswoman Kelly. Prior to her election to Congress, she was a member of the Illinois House of Representatives. She served as Chief Administrative Officer of Cook County and was Chief of Staff to Illinois State Treasurer Alexi Janulis, becoming the first African-American woman to serve as Chief of Staff to an elected constitutional statewide office holder. We thank her for taking time out today to be with us. It's my privilege to introduce U.S. Congresswoman Robin Kelly.
It's great to be here, and well, after months of being inside, it's probably great to be anywhere outside. But I'm glad that one of the first things we've come together to celebrate and mark is 100 years of suffrage for American women. It's a little crazy to think that within some people's lifetime, women weren't able to vote. It was our grandmothers and great-grandmothers, just 2 or 3 generations removed, who fought for and won this right. Women actually started fighting for the right to vote in the mid-1800s, as you've heard, and they've never stopped until they got it. Generation after generation picked up the mantle, making state-by-state progress as they ultimately achieved that seemingly impossible goal, changing the Constitution. By inventing many of the political tools and principles used today, they won supporters and elected leaders who shared their vision. Through a concerted effort, they amended the Constitution and ensured that their daughters and granddaughters wouldn't have to fight the very same fight. It's truly remarkable to think that these women, people without the right to vote, managed to use the electoral process to win it. However, we also know that this right wasn't equal and certainly wasn't for everyone. There was much more work to do. As we marked 100 years of women voting, we also marked 500 years since a woman named Angela was brought to Jamestown in chains and sold as property. Many of her descendants and the descendants of others like her didn't win their right to vote until decades later, even though African American women made up a large part of the suffrage movement, even though we were not initially welcomed. Within my own lifetime, women who looked like me and their families were openly and proudly denied their rights as Americans to vote through a huge part of this nation. But we Americans came together and said, this is wrong. Social pressure, largely from women, pushed LBJ to sign the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. That's a fact we all know. But let's think about that for a second. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. The big hits that year were My Girl, She Loves You by the Beatles, and The House of the Rising Sun. I'm sure some of us might still have those 45s in our garage. So what I'm trying to say is, it wasn't that long ago. We still cannot relax today because there are still open attacks on voting rights. The very right, the right to walk into a voting booth and help decide the future of your country that we and generations of our mothers and grandmothers fought for, are still under attack. That's why it's so critical, so crucial, we protect that right our foremothers and really ourselves and some of our own generation won by voting in every election. The next one is November 3rd. I'll be at the polls, and I expect you will too. What would your grandmother who marched in white banner blisters on her feet say if you did not vote? What about your great-grandmother who knocked on 250 doors with 3 kids in tow to elect pro-women candidates? Do you think they'd understand why you aren't explaining the importance to your daughter or to your son? What would our dearly departed friend, Congressman John Lewis, think? Scar on his head from a billy club if you were just too busy to make your voice heard. The best way to honor him and the brave suffragettes who paved the way for us is to honor them with action. It's to vote on November 3rd. And please remember, you can request your mail-in ballot today. The future is up to us, all of us. So please don't miss your opportunity to shape it. Thank you so much, and thank you, Mayor Patty.
Our next presenter is yet another female leader here in the Village of Lansing. Since moving to Lansing nearly 35 years ago, this individual has been involved in numerous aspects of the village, including being a Lansing volunteer paramedic, a police and fire commissioner, the secretary of the Lansing Volunteer Recognition Committee, an Honor Flight Chicago volunteer, and a Camp Quality medical volunteer. Professionally, she earned her doctorate in nursing practice in 2014 and is currently a professor of nursing at Prairie State College. In 2017, she was elected to serve as a Village of Lansing trustee. Here with a reading symbolizing the importance of today's event is Lansing Village trustee Maureen Grady-Perovich.
Equal suffrage, day of hope and day of glory. Comes the dawn of women's freedom, and the light shall grow and grow, until every man and woman equal liberty shall know, in freedom marching on. Women's right is women's duty. For our share in life we call. Our will it is not weakened, and our power it is not small. We have half of every nation. We are mothers of them all, in wisdom marching on. Not for self, but larger service has our cry for freedom grown. There is crime, disease, and warfare in a world of men alone. In the name of love, we're rising now to serve and save our own as peace comes marching on. By every sweet and tender tie around our heartstrings curled, in the cause of nobler motherhood, a woman's flag unfurled, till every child shall know the joy and peace of mother's world, a love comes marching on. We will help to make a pruning hook of every outgrown sword. We will help to knit the nations in continuing accord. In humanity, made perfect is the glory of the Lord, as his world goes marching on. Thank you.
Finally, on behalf of Mayor Idem and Village Clerk Payne, I want to sincerely thank all of you for attending today's event here at the Lansing Municipal Center. All of you make Lansing such a strong and vibrant community. Each of you here in attendance today is a shining example of the positive influence of women in our village. In the words of Alice Paul, one of the main leaders and strategists of the campaign for the 19th Amendment, quote, "I always feel the movement is a sort of mosaic. Each woman puts in one little stone, and then you get a great mosaic at the end." Thank you so much for attending, and congratulations on the 100th anniversary of your right to vote. Thank you.
Now you have heard of women's rights and how we tried to reach new heights if we're all created equal. That's us too. Yeah, but you will probably not recall that it's not been too long at all since we even had the right to cast a vote. Well, sure, some men bow down and call us missing. Yeah. Let us hang the wash out and wash the dishes. But when the time rolls around to elect a president, what did they say, sister? What did they say? They said, see you later, alligator. And don't forget my mashed potatoes, cause I'm going downtown to cast my vote for president. We were suffering until suffering. Not a woman here could vote no matter what age. And the 19th Amendment struck down that restrictive rule. Oh, yeah! And now we pull down on the lever, cast our ballot, and we endeavor to improve our country, state, county, town, and school. Those pilgrim women who braved the vote could cook the turkey, but they could not vote. Even Betsy Ross, who sold the flag, was left behind that first election day. Then Susan B., Anthony, and Julia Howe, Lucretia Mott, they showed us how